All right, welcome everyone. Welcome, one and all to Impolite Company on the www.gcpr.live network, where we defy that old adage, the adage that you're not supposed to talk about religion and politics in polite company. We defy that head first. We talk about religion and politics because, frankly, as I have said, I don't think that adage has served the church, people of faith. I don't think it has served our country and the politics very well. So this is what we do. We have healthy conversations about religion and politics. I'm your host, Matthew Best, here to walk with you in honest dialogue, showcase the power of humanity, seeing the humanity of people of different perspectives. You can send me questions and comments to contactimpolitecompany@gmail.com. That's contactimpolitecompany@gmail.com. That's impolite, not impolite. And you can find previous episodes. Sign up to listen to them for new episodes as well. You can find it on popular podcast channels like iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can see the videos on YouTube. All sorts of great stuff. Just look for Impolite Company, look for our logo, which is the microphone, and then Impolite Company under it. You can dive further into the topics that we talk about by going to my blog, which is pastormatthewbest.com. See lots of different stuff. I am a prolific writer, self-described prolific writer, also doing things with sermons and those type of things. Nice mixture of religion and politics. Some book reviews. I will tell you some of the most popular posts I have are book reviews of books that I have read in the past. Always love conversation about things. If you enjoy what we're doing here, I invite you to support the show. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/Impolite Company. I'll just turn it right around and invest it right back into the show. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a couple of moments to highlight a couple things. You can show some love to Christ Lutheran Church in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, here in the heart of Allison Hill, which is one of the most economically challenged sections of the eastern half of Pennsylvania, easily. It's the church that I'm called to serve as a pastor. What makes this place special is that we also host 3 free clinics. That since 2018, we've had over 100,000 visits. That's a huge impact. And what is it? Today is March 16th. In 2 weeks from now, on March 30th, I will be running my 20th half marathon, which is the Philly Love Half Marathon. And I'm using it as an opportunity to raise some funds for Christ Lutheran Church. So if you want to support Christ Lutheran Church, especially in this time, now is a great time to do it. You can go to christharrisburg.org/donate. Scroll down to Christ Lutheran Church, click that donate button. Some different ways to do that. I have some giving levels, right? So 1310. Why 1310? Because there's 13.1 miles in a half marathon. That would be a nice way to support. Otherwise, $20 because it's my 20th half marathon. If you do that, I'll put your name on. I have a sign down in the hallway. People come in, everybody sees it. It's the sign waiver club, right? One of the other levels is $100. I can give you a hat that says Christ Lutheran Church on it. But those are just a few of the things. So if you want to support Christ Lutheran Church, everything gets turned right back in to try and help as many people as we possibly can and provide healing. A couple of other things. If you care about homelessness, you can check out the Memorial Blanket Project. This is an incredible project. It was supposed to be a 1-year project, and it keeps going. It's going to be the 5th year this year in 2025, which is just mind-blowing to me. People make blankets from across the world now. Last year we had a blanket from Australia and one from Germany, which is incredible to think about. People make blankets, quilts, handmade. They send them to us. We take them to a location, create an art installation to highlight the issue of homelessness, to raise awareness around it. We do this over the course of a day. We do a podcast with it, and then we hand the blankets all out. Whether they go directly, we're directly handing to people who are experiencing, are unhoused, or we work with agencies that work with them and make sure that all of the blankets go out. It's amazing. Over 1,000 blankets every year. go to different places. I just got a picture yesterday, which was really cool, of a group that came to Philadelphia this past year where we had it. They had sent me pictures of them handing blankets out, which was it's just so heartwarming to know, like, hey, these blankets really are getting into the hands of people who need them. So thank you for that. So you can go to memorialblanket.org. And lastly, if you're looking for a tool to help with conversations around gun violence, there's a book called American Roulette. I'm the guy who came up with the concept, but there are a total of 10 authors, and it's a book. It's a fictional account of a mass shooting, and the focus is really on following the lives of these characters over the course of one day. We don't offer solutions, because as soon as you start doing that, gone, conversation shuts down. We want to highlight the issue of humanity in this. It changes the conversation. It makes it as difficult as it seems. It's not an easy thing, right? Because we're dealing with a lot of things going on. And so you can find it anywhere that you find books. If you get it at a local bookstore, you can request it. I'm sure they would be more than happy to help you out. American Roulette. So before I get to my guest today, who's going to be coming on here just shortly, and I'll do an introduction then, I wanted to dive in. I was going to post this, but this was really just kind of incredible today. Richard Rohr, who's somebody that I follow a lot, he has a daily meditation that I really want to encourage you, whether you're Christian or not. I think there's a lot of, like, he's a deep thinker, more of on the mystic side of things, and he offers a whole range of different thoughts. He had something that really stuck out to me today, and so I just want to read a little bit of this and then talk a little bit about this, because I think his insight is really important, and I think it will help us when my guest comes on. It will just flow right into it. So this is Richard Rohr, who is a Franciscan background. He has this what is it? It's the Center for Action and Contemplation. I think it's in either New Mexico or Arizona. Very deep, a person of deep faith. So and again, you can sign up, you can get these in your email. I encourage you to go just search for Center for Action and Contemplation. Every day you'll get something from them. So here's what it says. It says, Father Richard Rohr invites us to consider how well we love others, especially the stranger, as Jesus teaches. If our love of God doesn't directly influence, and this is coming from Richard Rohr, and even change how we engage in the issues of our time, I wonder what good religion is. God talk becomes an opaque screen in which we see only reflections of ourselves rather than any kind of true light. Anyone who says they love God and hates their brother or sister is a liar. That's from 1 John 4. None of us want to be a liar, yet religion's high goals make failure almost inevitable for all of us. Our daily question is, have I even begun to love? Most Christians tend to echo the cultural prejudices and worldviews of the dominant group of their country, with only a minority revealing any real transformation of attitudes or consciousness. It's been true of slavery and racism, classism and consumerism, issues of immigration and health care for the poor. From a religion based on a man who is always healing poor people and praising foreigners, it defies any logical analysis. One would think that people who insist they believe in one God would understand that everyone on earth is equally a child of that one God. Christians ought to be first in line to cross artificial boundaries created by nation states, class systems, cultures, and even religions. Often we're the last. It makes me wonder if we believe what we say we believe. Religion too often becomes the way to defend the self instead of the way to let go of the self, as Jesus forthrightly taught. Wow. Let me just say that as I get a drink here, that is a powerful meditation. There's so many things that stick out in this. Where to even begin, right? I think when Richard Rohr is talking in here about the second paragraph, essentially, most Christians tend to echo the cultural prejudices and worldviews of the dominant group in their country. Ooh, boy, I think we see that in a lot of ways. I think this is where the idea of Christian nationalism really kind of plays its role in this sense of these prejudices and worldviews of the dominant group, or at least a dominant way of thinking in that. Even if it's not the majority, it has this kind of dominating principle to it. And again, he's listing all these things. It's true of slavery, racism, classism, consumerism, immigration, healthcare for the poor, right? And it defies logical analysis. Yes, it does. How can you possibly say that you are following somebody who stands for one set of things, who is, his inaugural address, if you want to think about it, when he preaches in the synagogue and pulls out the scroll from Isaiah, I have come to proclaim good news to the poor, set the captives free, the year of favor for God, all those things, right? How can you claim to follow the person who's saying that and then embrace things that are the exact opposite? I don't know, but I think I'm also under an assumption, and this is really kind of a key point in this. There's an assumption on my part that everybody sees the same Jesus, that everybody sees the same, is saying that, oh yeah, this is exactly what Jesus is about, and that is not the case. I don't think that's the case. I don't know that it's ever been the case, right? I mean, if you take a look at church history, there's plenty of fights about about who Jesus was. If you take a look at the creeds, and notice something about the creeds is that you got a paragraph about God the Father, then you've got this whole long paragraph about Jesus, but it's got nothing about while Jesus was doing ministry. It's nothing. It's all about what has been, who he was as far as being born, and then what happens later, but not during his ministry. We have been fighting about who Jesus is and what it means to follow Jesus since the very beginning. That is something that's really important to keep in mind. It's the only way that this all makes sense, because I'm right there with Richard Rohr. How can it possibly make sense to say that we're following Jesus, this guy who cared about outcasts, those on the margins, who healed people, who gave second, third, fourth, fifth chances, and then turn around and support things that go against all of that? Right? This becomes really difficult. The last paragraph that Richard Rohr had in here, one would think that people who insist they believe in one God would understand that everyone on earth is equally a child of that one God. There's an assumption in this, right? Because people have their beliefs about God, and oftentimes, if you want to understand someone's belief about God, my experience has shown that you can see that based on how they are, how they interact with other people, and then you get a sense of what their belief about God is. So anyway, I wanted to share that a little bit, and just it just struck me in that. And I want to welcome my guest, who is now here, Adam Friedman. Thank you so much for being here, Adam. It's so great to have you here. Oh, absolutely. I'm really excited to have this conversation. Let me do an official introduction of you to do it properly here. So today I am welcoming Adam Friedman, who is Interfaith Alliance's organizing and elections strategist. Adam is an organizer and advocate based in Washington, D.C. Adam first got involved in advocacy through the Reformed Jewish Youth Movement before co-founding Team Enough, Brady United's Youth Initiative, and Team Enough's lobbying collective programs. Before starting at Interfaith Alliance, Adam organized political campaigns in Virginia. He currently oversees democracy and voting rights policy work at Interfaith Alliance, in addition to managing Interfaith Alliance's field initiatives and affiliate network. He is dedicated to building power across movements in opposition to white Christian nationalism in the United States, and cites his Jewish values as the root of his justice work. Adam, thank you so much for being here. What I was talking about with folks was I get a daily email meditation from Father Richard Rohr. I don't know if you're familiar with him or his work, but today's meditation really hit me, and it was really this idea of I'll just read one paragraph on this. He said, most Christians tend to echo the cultural prejudices and worldviews of the dominant group of their country, with only a minority revealing any real transformation of attitudes or consciousness. It's been true of slavery and racism, classism and consumerism, issues of immigration and healthcare for the poor, from a religion based on a man who's always healing poor people and praising foreigners. It defies any logical analysis. And I just was talking about this whole idea in a broader sense, even of, to be faithful and to say that, hey, I'm going to be whatever faith it is, and then to act in a way that seems at least incongruent with that. It boggles the mind. And I also was talking about this idea that it's also an assumption on my part that what I believe about what it means to follow God, everyone else who is claiming, a certain faith, obviously they must clearly believe the same thing about Jesus, about God, about whoever the case may be. And that's a bad assumption. It's just, this is where we have variety, right? Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. 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 This is every passing day, the complexity of humanity just keeps revealing itself, right? Because there's not nice, easy answers, really, for hardly anything. Yeah, there are easy answers for some things, and this is where I think we oftentimes make a mistake, whether we're talking about religion or politics, in the sense that when something isn't working right, our first instinct often ends up going to, well, let's find a technical or technological fix for this. And what the problem that does is it's putting more on technical and technological fixes than what should be. It's unfair to them, because what we're oftentimes dealing with is this is a human challenge or a spiritual challenge or an emotional challenge or whatever the case may be. And it's not to say that there aren't important places for technical fixes and technological fixes. They have their place and they can add so much, but to then kind of put that over everything, it it creates more problems than it solves with that. No, I've heard of it though. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Sure, sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's reminding me right now the book that I'm reading is Why Politics Fails by Ben Ansel. And he has some of that in there, right? He's talking about democracy specifically. And I'm not too far in, maybe 100 pages at most. And he's using the example of the Brexit vote in Britain and how that went on for a couple of years without a solution, right? They had the referendum, and then the problem was Parliament figuring out what to do with that referendum, right? And so like Parliament brought in Ben and they brought in a couple of other folks who were experts in whatever it is that they do, and how to decide things. And it was like the cycling is the term that he uses, the cycling, because there were too many options as opposed to having two, and so it never ended up being kind of, and there was so much polarization that the people were strategizing how they were voting in order to not get certain things. And so like I just get this same kind of sense of like so many people were looking for a technical answer when, well, this is not a technical problem. You know, this is a an identity problem. This is a human problem, a spiritual problem. What does it mean to be British problem? That type of thing. And they were they were never addressing that. So Adam, I want to jump in, and for folks that are not familiar with Interfaith Alliance, maybe you can give us a quick summary. Who is Interfaith Alliance, and what do you all do? Yeah, that's great. That's powerful. And we met in the fall of this past year. You all were doing a cross country, or half the country cross country bus tour, going into kind of these swing states. And you came to, and it was, I think it was the day before election day that you came here to Harrisburg to Allison Hill. You had the bus, and it was this huge bus that you all were probably living on and called home for like a couple of weeks. And it said the vote is sacred on that. So what, I'm always curious about this. what? How did you feel that the bus tour? What kind of impact that had? I bet. Hmm. Yeah. Well, I will tell you, we were nourished on the receiving end. Number one, that you all were like, "Hey, let's come into this neighborhood," which on it, it has a reputation, right? And of, oh, it's unsafe and all that, which oftentimes comes from outside places, people that don't know, or there's history and all that type of thing, or have an idea about it. But then there's the reality of when you're here and you spend time in the community. These are people. These are people's lives, their stories, their complexities, all this type of stuff. And it was so wonderful to have, number one, to have this bus show up. That's on the side of it, unavoidable. It says the vote is sacred, um, and and that, I think, changes the conversation about elections, which I would imagine that's the whole reason why you went with that slogan in there. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that. Yeah, yeah. Right. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, sure. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Sure. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. In Harrisburg. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. 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 This is also striking me. you know, I think what you said very much on the political side of things. I have this background in politics as well. I worked for a member of Congress. I worked for a state representative. I've done campaign work, right? And what happens is you get, depending on the race that you're doing, you get the precinct data of how many people are in that precinct, how many are registered a certain way, when you find out when did they vote. You don't know, of course, what they voted, but how often they vote. You can see who's giving and what amounts, all those numbers in there. And I think that also then applies to worshiping communities, at least in the Christian tradition that I'm coming from. It's been this historical thing that the two things that get measured are attendance and money, and that's the primary things that get measured. And it's like, okay, those are okay things to measure. However, I think we're missing some things. Right? And again, it's like, but we have a difficult time figuring out, well, what else should we be measuring? Those are kind of the universal, that regardless of where you are, it's easy to measure those things, right? And again, I'm not against measuring those two things, but this is where I think it gets into, we're talking about the complexity of the impact. Oftentimes, it's not a nice measurable thing that you can point to, right? It's going to take some time. You all have been doing this for 30 years, is what you said, and there's a whole long line of lives that are touched and relationships that happen, and because of those relationships, it's kind of like the pebble in the water, just ripples forward. So I want to and then ask you about, because we are kind of shifting into this idea of relationship, and I know previous times we've talked about the idea of building bridges, not in a literal sense. You don't want me doing that, but in terms of connecting with people who see things differently, right? Building bridges across ideas to seeing the commonality and what unites us and those type of things. There's a lot of folks, and you know this very well, there's a lot of folks who are angry and afraid. This is one of the appeals of Christian nationalism, is it kind of speaks to that, and then there's a scapegoat for pointing out why somebody is afraid or why they should be angry, those type of things. And it seems to be that there are an increasing number of folks who would be, I think the poll is like that they have been think it's acceptable to do violence to achieve an end, which is kind of this ends justify the means type of approach. So there's an obvious question and answer to this, is how important is bridge building relationships, but I want to go beyond just the obvious. Maybe to, what does it mean to build bridges for you? What does that mean? Mm. Okay. Yeah. Mm. Wow. Yeah. 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 Right. 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 Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. 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 Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. 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 No, no, that was, I did not interrupt you, believe me. Because I'm, I've been sitting there going, yeah, that's exactly right. It's reminding me of a professor that I had back in college, way back in the last century, which I sound really old now. Um, uh, but this was a political science professor, and he said the reality is there are no Democrat or Republican ways to collect trash, right? That's kind of the idea of what you're talking about is, look, the trash has to be collected. There's not a there's not an ideological answer to collecting the trash. So, there's some practical things like, hey, the trash needs to be picked up. It needs to be picked up on a regular schedule. There needs to be a truck. There needs to be someone who's going to do it. None of that gets into an ideological, or it shouldn't. I mean, I guess somebody could turn it into an ideological type of thing, but the reality is, hey, here's something that the community has said there's a need. let's work together to figure out the best way to do that, knowing it's not going to be perfect. But hey, there's some things that we can probably, that don't get into the level of identity, that don't get into all that type of stuff. The other thing that I heard you talking about, and I've talked about this before, is the idea of taking issues from this abstract in the ether type of thing, where that's where the tweets are, that's where the bumper sticker logic, that's where the arguments on Facebook happen, and all this, where just pick an issue. It doesn't matter what it is, whether we're talking about abortion or immigration or LGBTQ rights or whatever the case may be. When it's this abstract thing, then people get really like fired up, and they get angry, and it's almost like kind of road rage, but for issues, that depersonalized type of thing. But then all of a sudden, if you bring those down from abstract into, immigration isn't this abstract thing, it's so and so that we both know, and that maybe goes to our house of worship, or that works in the grocery store, whatever the case may be, lives down the street, or whatever the case may be, and now all of a sudden it gets more complex, right? It's messier, because now there's somebody's story involved in this, and there aren't just nice, easy stories out there. I've never come across someone who's like, oh yeah, A and then B, and that's it. There's a lot that goes into it, just like any of us, right? I mean, we all have our own stories, and they're all complex, and they're messy, and it's kind of like you got A and B, and the arguments that happen on the internet have a nice straight line that connect the two. But when you start talking about actual people's lives, that line goes all over the place, right? It's the squiggly, and it's just a mess. That's what I'm hearing in that. So yeah, I love your answer to that. It was not rambling, believe me. So I want to talk a little bit about, because this kind of relates to white Christian nationalism. I think it relates to a lot of other things about how religion can be used. And it's been used, a lot of different religions, they all can be used in either healthy or unhealthy ways. They can be used to divide, restrict, impose, those type of things. And the other focus seems to be more of like a love of neighbor, a breaking down of barriers. And again, I'm giving you kind of a range of maybe extremes on that. How much do you think this is grounded in how people see their sense of the divine, like this projection? Does that question make sense? Yeah. So I have this theory that if you want to understand what people actually believe about God, then take a look at how someone is treating other people, because it will it's our projection of how God has treated us is how we then go and treat other people. So it's almost this kind of mixture of how. So in a sense, it's kind of like when we read whatever the Holy Scriptures are for whatever faith. How are we putting ourselves? How much of ourselves are we putting into this versus what are we hearing? And this is kind of going back to kind of the original thing that I was talking about with how can somebody say that they're following this and then do something that seems, at least to an outside observer, to be completely opposite and maybe in conflict with what was just said. Is that helpful at all? Sure. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Wow. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Oh yeah. 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 Sure. Sure. Yeah. I I would agree, and I think that you're naming this idea of fear, and oftentimes I think fear is a symptom of other things, right? I think like one of the things that I often talk about is the idea of, I think a lot of our problems as human beings come from this idea that we have this desire for control and for knowing, which are the same thing. And when we don't feel the security of a sense of control, or have a sense of knowing what's going to happen to some degree, a reasonable degree, then all of a sudden now there's this sense of fear, right? There's this gap that's been created from something that we created, a concept that says, oh, we're supposed to have a certain level of control, we're supposed to know a certain amount of stuff, and when we're not reaching those limits, then there's a gap, and something's got to fill that gap. And so we end up with fear, we end up with scapegoating of people. There's got to be a reason, right? And one of the things I remember, one of the first classes I took in seminary was called the theology of cancer. Talk about diving right in. And the first half of the semester was all about the science of cancer at that time. So this is going back to 2012. So science has certainly changed in that time. And the professor was very clear on saying, you're going to learn this now, but understand that it's going to be outdated by the time you graduate. But that's not the point. And then we spent time in congregations that had somebody either having cancer or lost people who had cancer, those type of things. And so much of what was going on is the sense that there's all these things people want to say, oh, there's a reason why so and so got cancer, And a lot of times it's this kind of like, oh, God must have wanted to teach a lesson or something else, really bad theology. And because we got to have a reason. And the emphasis at the beginning part of it was cancer oftentimes doesn't have a reason. It just is. And it does its own thing. And there isn't a nice, easy answer. It just is. And it was like, ooh, wow. That's hard for people to take in, because then there's nothing to fill that gap in there. And I just sense that with, what you were talking about, it just kind of brought that to mind. So we're getting to, go ahead. Yeah. 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 Right. Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. 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 I think that speaks a lot to the whole idea also that what's most important is not being right. Right? I mean, this is, to me, I'll often, even when I'm preaching, I talk about the concept of shalom. Because for me, when I hear Jesus talking about the kingdom of God, I think he's talking about shalom. And I go on into a lot of explaining, like, shalom is more than just a greeting of peace. It's a sense of wholeness and completeness and enoughness, right? This is what Jesus is always talking about. The kingdom of heaven is it's shalom, is right, which makes sense. He's coming from, you know, he's Jewish, of course he's talking about shalom. That makes perfect sense. And so this kind of gets away from rightness, being right as most important, to again seeing the humanity, being in right relationship. What you were talking about, being showing up for somebody, caring for, loving your neighbor, all those type of things. It's seeing the image of God in people, so that and I'll take that a step further. Of if I can see the image of God in my neighbor, it means I can also see it in myself. Which I think oftentimes there's an assumption that, oh yeah, we see the image of God in ourselves. I think there's a lot of folks who struggle with that. And then project that out onto other people as well, because they're struggling, and life is hard, and stuff happens, and so anyway, before we're done, and we only got 5 minutes. It's been a great conversation so far. I want to give you an opportunity to maybe share like a story of success. I always like to end on some kind of like a good note, because we talk about difficult topics. Maybe a story of success that you've had with Interfaith Alliance, and what maybe kind of what can people do, especially right now when they're oftentimes feel like, oh my gosh, what this is overwhelming. Maybe a story that kind of relates to that. Yeah, if you don't mind sharing that. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.